I never thought a family holiday could begin with an ambulance and end with a broken truth I could never unsee. It was Thanksgiving morning when I called Grandpa, just to say I was excited to see him again. He didn't answer. Strange, I though he always answered. 5 minutes later, my dad texted me, "Don't worry about your grandpa. We told him not to come. Cynthia doesn't want him there." I froze. My hands trembled as I reread those words. Grandpa wasn't just family, he was my family. The one who made pumpkin waffles when I was sick. The one who showed up to every art recital, even after my mom died. Now he was being pushed aside like an inconvenience. I grabbed my keys. I needed to see him. But when I pulled up to his house, I saw the ambulance. And my entire world flipped. I sat in my car for a full minute, staring at the spinning red lights. Paramedics were still inside. The front door was wide open. Grandpa's mailbox hung slightly crooked. He used to fix that every Saturday morning like clockwork, but not today. I got out slowly, every step toward the porch feeling heavier than the last. A neighbor across the street, Mr. Callahan, waved me down and hurried over. His gray cardigan flapped behind him in the wind. "Sophia," he said out of breath, "your grandpa collapsed. Right there." He pointed to the top step. He was just standing, like he was waiting for someone. I covered my mouth, a wave of nausea rushing through me. "Did he say anything?" Mr. Callahan hesitated. He kept looking at the road, said something like, "Maybe they'll change their minds." Then he just dropped. I ran up the steps, but the paramedics were wheeling him out already. One of them paused. "He's unconscious but breathing. We're taking him to County General." "I'm coming too," I said immediately. They nodded. But before I could get in the ambulance, my phone buzzed. It was Dad. The timing couldn't have been worse. I answered, barely keeping my voice level. "Dad, Grandpa collapsed. He's being rushed to the hospital." There was a pause. Then, his voice came calm, cold, like he was commenting on the weather. "He's just being dramatic, Sophia. You know how he is." I stopped walking. What the hell does that mean? It means he's always trying to make things about him. Cynthia didn't want him here today. We asked nicely. Maybe he took it the wrong way. I was shaking. "Dad," he was standing on his porch, dressed in full suit and tie, waiting for you to call. "He collapsed. And you think he's faking it?" "I didn't say faking," he muttered. "Just overreacting." That was it. I ended the call. And in that moment, standing in the cold, watching the only person who'd ever truly shown up for me get loaded into an ambulance, I knew something had broken that couldn't be fixed. Whatever came next. I wasn't going to protect their comfort anymore. Not after what they did to him. The ambulance tore down the street, sirens wailing against the quiet of Thanksgiving morning. I followed in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I couldn't stop picturing him, Grandpa Arthur, lying on the porch in his best gray suit, the same one he always wore for family holidays, the same one he ironed the night before every Thanksgiving, just in case. He must have believed they'd call, that my dad would change his mind. And he waited. He stood in the cold, hopeful, until his body gave out. I blinked hard to stay focused on the road, but the tears kept falling. I wasn't crying out of fear. I was crying because something inside me had snapped. This wasn't just neglect. It was betrayal. When I got to County General, the ER waiting room was eerily quiet. A nurse led me to the reception desk and asked me to wait while they assessed him. 20 minutes passed. Then a nurse, maybe in her 40s, kind eyes behind tired glasses, walked over. "You're Sophia?" "Yes." I stood. She held out a sealed envelope. "Your grandfather had this in his pocket. Said to give it to you if anything ever happened and you were the first to arrive." I took it with trembling hands. The handwriting on the front was his. Neat, slanted, familiar. For Sophia, if it's ever too late to say it out loud. I didn't open it right away. I sat down first. Let my breath slow. The hospital lights buzzed overhead, the scent of antiseptic clinging to everything. Then, I broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten with care. The first line stopped me cold. If you're reading this, then I probably didn't get the chance to tell you the truth in person. But I need you to know. I'm proud of you. More than you'll ever know. My throat tightened. He went on to talk about how he never wanted to be a burden. How, after Grandma died, he tried to keep the family together especially for my sake. But he wrote something else too, something that made my blood chill. Last week, your father came by, not to invite me, to tell me never to show up again. Cynthia said I'm too old-fashioned, that I make guests uncomfortable. He told me, to my face, I was no longer welcome. Still, I hoped. I put on my suit anyway. By the time I finished the letter, I was shaking with rage. So Dad had spoken to him, but not to explain, just to erase him. And Grandpa still stood outside in the cold, hoping they'd change their minds. But I wasn't going to let him be erased. Not now. Not ever. After I finished the letter, I just sat there, letter on my lap, fists clenched, breath shallow. Some part of me still wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that maybe Dad was just angry, misinformed, pressured by Cynthia. Maybe he hadn't really said those words to Grandpa. But Grandpa never lied to me. And I couldn't ignore that line. He told me, to my face, I was no longer welcome. Still, I needed to know. I needed proof, not for myself, but because I knew they'd twist it, make it sound like Grandpa imagined the whole thing, or worse, make me sound ungrateful for questioning them. So I drove straight to Grandpa's house. The porch light was still on, casting long shadows across the now empty steps. His hat was lying beside the doorway. I picked it up and pressed it to my chest for a second before stepping inside with my spare key. The air was still warm. He'd probably turn the heat up in case guests arrived. The dining table had been set for one. Pumpkin pie. Still wrapped. Whipped cream unopened. My heart cracked. I went to his small living room and found the tiny black security camera above the bookshelf. Grandpa had installed it last year after a few break-ins in the neighborhood. I remembered helping him sync it to his old laptop. I sat down, opened the laptop, and pulled up the feed. I didn't expect what I saw. The footage was time-stamped 5 days ago. A knock on the door. Grandpa opened it still in his cardigan, not yet dressed for the holiday. And there was Dad, standing stiffly on the porch, hands in his coat pockets. Cynthia was behind him, sunglasses on, even though it was cloudy. I clicked play. Dad. Arthur, let's not drag this out. Don't come Thursday. It's not up for discussion. Grandpa. It's Thanksgiving. I've always come. Cynthia. Cutting in. This year's just different. We've got guests. A modern vibe. You wouldn't enjoy it. Grandpa. But, Sophia, she'll expect to see me. Dad. We'll tell her something. Just don't come. Then he turned and walked away. Just like that. Grandpa stood in the doorway for a long moment, then quietly closed the door. I sat frozen. That was it. The truth. And I had it. I stared at the laptop screen as if it could burn them through the pixels. My pulse pounded. My vision blurred with tears, but not the silent kind. These were angry tears. They didn't just forget to invite him. They came all the way here to his home to cut him out of the family. And Grandpa? He still put on his suit. Still made pie. Still hoped. That night, lying awake on his couch with the old knit blanket he kept for guests, I made a decision. They didn't just betray him. They erased him. Now, I was going to bring him back into the picture whether they liked it or not. I didn't sleep that night. I tried curled up on Grandpa's couch with his flannel blanket and the soft ticking of the wall clock, but my mind was burning. I kept hearing his voice, brittle with heartbreak. But, Sophia, she'll expect to see me. I stared at the ceiling and made my decision. No more silence. The next morning, after checking in with the hospital, Grandpa was still unconscious but stable. I drove back home, showered, and sat down at my desk. I opened the video footage, exported it, trimmed nothing. Then, I opened my social media, a platform where I rarely posted anything beyond art commissions and birthday wishes. But today was different. I wrote slowly at first, then faster. The words spilled out like they'd been waiting my whole life. Yesterday, my grandfather collapsed on his front porch, alone, in the cold, in his best suit. Why? Because my father and stepmother told him he wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving this year. They showed up 5 days ago just to tell him that to his face. I have it on video. He's still dressed up, made pumpkin pie, and waited. He waited for them to change their minds. They never did. I got to his house just in time to see an ambulance pull away. I attached the footage. No edits, no dramatic music, just the raw, painful clip of my grandfather, the man who raised me, being discarded like a forgotten obligation. Then I added the final line. Some people say family is everything. I say family is the people who show up, not the ones who push you aside. And I hit post. I didn't expect it to explode. But it did. Within an hour, messages started pouring in. Old neighbors from our hometown, former colleagues of my grandfather, he'd taught high school English for 30 years, students, church friends, people who hadn't seen him in decades. Comments like, Mr. Monroe gave me my first book of poetry. He helped me pass my GED when I had no one. That man deserved better. My inbox filled with warmth, but then came the other messages. From cousins, from family, even from my aunt, Dad's older sister who lived in Colorado. Is this real? Did Greg really say that? I knew Cynthia was awful, but I didn't know it was this bad. Yes, it was real. And now, it was public. By the end of the day, my post had been shared over 0 times. Local news outlets were already reaching out. A former student of Grandpa Snow, a lawyer, messaged me directly. If you need help making sure he's protected legally, let me know. Your grandfather is a good man. I stared at that message, stunned. I hadn't even thought about legal steps, but now that someone had said it, I realized maybe that's what I needed next. This wasn't just personal anymore, it was systemic. They didn't just hurt Grandpa emotionally. They exploited him, financially, psychologically, and it was time they faced the consequences. The next morning, I returned to the hospital early. Grandpa was awake but weak, his voice barely a whisper, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. You came, he said, the faintest smile on his lips. Of course I did, I whispered back, brushing his hand with mine. I'm staying, and I'm not letting them hurt you anymore. He didn't ask what I meant. He just closed his eyes and nodded, as if he already knew. Later, while he rested, I stepped out into the hallway and called the lawyer who had messaged me, Elliot Tran, a former student of Grandpa's. We met at a nearby cafe that afternoon. He was kind, soft-spoken, but his questions were direct. Do you have access to your grandfather's financial documents? He asked. I think so. He keeps everything in a wooden box in his living room, I said. Then you should check them. Look for transfers, authorizations, anything under your father or Cynthia's name. Back at Grandpa's house that evening, I found the box easily bottom shelf of the bookcase, behind an old globe. Inside were binders labeled by year, all sorted with meticulous handwriting. Grandpa had kept every receipt, every bank statement, every withdrawal slip. And something stood out immediately. Monthly transfers to Greg Monroe. 800, 200. Notarized, support agreements, signed but unregistered. Payments labeled as family assistance, Cynthia's medical, and one even labeled Tommy's tuition, a child that wasn't even blood-related. I sat back in the chair, the paper trembling in my hands. They weren't just emotionally cruel. They'd been draining him for years. No repayment plans, no acknowledgement, no gratitude, just silent extraction. One transaction from last winter broke me. 50-wire memo to help Greg get through the holidays. The holidays. The same holidays where they now told him not to come. I took photos of everything, sent them to Elliot. He called me 15 minutes later. There's a case here, he said. Not just financial exploitation. This is elder abuse. And if we push this, we can freeze any continued withdrawals immediately. My hands trembled as I clutched the phone. Will it hurt Grandpa? No, Elliot said gently. But it will protect him. And it will send a message. I hung up, walked to the fireplace, and stared at the faded family photo that still sat above the mantel, Dad in the center, smiling like he hadn't thrown his own father away. Then I took it down. I replaced it with a new photo, just me and Grandpa from my high school graduation. His hand on my shoulder, both of us smiling, without anyone else in the frame. Because this house didn't belong to guilt anymore. It belonged to truth. And to the people who actually stayed. They showed up 3 days later. Unannounced. Middle of the afternoon. Just as I was returning from the hospital pharmacy with Grandpa's new medication, I parked the car and saw them standing on the front porch, Dad in his wool coat, hands buried deep in his pockets. Cynthia wore oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy sky, her arms crossed like she owned the place. They looked nervous. Good. I got out, locked the car slowly, then walked up the driveway. Sophia, Dad said, his voice tight. We need to talk. I figured you might, I said flatly. After the internet found out who you really are. He flinched. Cynthia stepped forward. This has all been blown out of proportion. Your grandfather was never excluded. We just suggested it wasn't the best year. You told him on video not to come. I cut in. You said, and I quote, "It's not up for discussion." Dad cleared his throat. You took that out of context. No, I said. You took him out of context. Out of the picture. Out of the family. And now you're shocked the world noticed. They both stared. Greg, I said, calling him by his first name for the first time in my life. You didn't just ban your own father from Thanksgiving. You used him. For years. Financially. Emotionally. And then you discarded him when he didn't fit Cynthia's modern vibe. Cynthia opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't let her. You used his money to pay off credit cards, tuition, even property taxes on a second car. You treated him like a bank, then had the audacity to bar him from the holiday he loved most. Dad's face hardened. Sophia, we're still your family. I stared at him. No, you're not. Grandpa is my family. The man who raised me, showed up for me, and never asked for anything in return. He took a step forward. We came to apologize. No, you came because you're scared, I said, voice sharp. Because the post went viral. Because the lawyer sent you the cease and desist notice. Because the withdrawals are frozen. Not because you're sorry. A long silence stretched between us. Wind rustled the dried leaves on the steps where Grandpa had collapsed. Then I added, softly but clearly, he almost died waiting for you to change your mind. That hit him. I saw it. But guilt without change means nothing. You should go, I said. He's not ready to see you. And frankly, neither am I. Cynthia finally dropped her mask. You're being unreasonable. I looked her straight in the eye. No, I'm being a granddaughter. I stepped inside and closed the door before they could say another word. Inside, Grandpa was napping, the TV on low. I sat down beside him, brushing his hand gently. We're okay now, I whispered. But in my heart, I knew the battle wasn't over. It had just turned into something bigger than me. And I was ready for it. The next day, I stood outside the Monroe County Courthouse, envelope in hand, heart pounding like a war drum. Inside that envelope was everything. Screenshots of financial transfers, Grandpa's handwritten letter, the notarized but unfiled agreements, and a USB drive with the security footage. Elliot met me at the steps, dressed in a navy coat and carrying his signature leather folio. You sure about this? He asked quietly. I nodded. They left him to collapse on his own porch. I'm sure. We filed the petition for financial elder abuse and conservatorship fraud within the hour. It wasn't about money. Grandpa never wanted revenge. But I knew this was the only language they would understand. Accountability. Legally. Publicly. By the end of the week, The story had caught fire. A local news outlet picked it up after my viral post then. A state journalist followed up, titling the piece, "He was told not to come for Thanksgiving," then collapsed alone. His granddaughter fought back. I didn't ask for attention, but attention came. And with it, support. Letters poured in from teachers, veterans, widows, students. People who had once known Grandpa Arthur as more than just an old man. They remembered him as a mentor, a neighbor, a voice of calm in hard times. One message stood out. He gave me a used math book in 1989 when I couldn't afford school supplies. It changed my life. You're doing the right thing, Sophia. Meanwhile, the silence from Dad and Cynthia was telling. No public apology, no defense, just quiet fury brewing behind closed doors. Until they made a mistake. Cynthia called Grandpa's bank and tried to authorize a reimbursement from his account claiming she had verbal permission, but the account had already been flagged. The call was recorded. Elliot got the notice 2 days later. Now, it wasn't just a civil case. It was potential criminal fraud. We updated the case and pressed further. My hands shook signing the updated complaint, but I never hesitated. Not once. That same evening, a producer from a regional talk show contacted me. "Would your grandfather be willing to share his story?" they asked. This could bring awareness to elder financial abuse across the state. I asked Grandpa the next morning. He looked at me from his hospital bed, tired but steady. "If it helps other people, maybe it's time," he said. So we did it. The segment aired the following week. Grandpa wore his best blue sweater, and I sat beside him. He didn't cry, he didn't rant. He just told the truth. I never thought my own son would see me as disposable. But I'm lucky. My granddaughter reminded me that silence only protects the wrong people. The interview ended with a photo of us. Me and Grandpa. On his porch. New steps beneath us. Pumpkin pie in his lap. 3 days later, Cynthia and Dad were served with subpoenas. Not long after, an emergency conservatorship was granted in my name. I now had authority to protect Grandpa's assets, health care, and housing decisions. He cried quietly when the judge read it out loud. "I feel like I can breathe again," he whispered. But the most unexpected moment came a week later. Dad showed up outside Grandpa's house alone this time. I didn't open the door, but I let him speak through the screen. "Sophia," he said, voice hoarse. I didn't know how far it had gone. I just wanted peace. I looked at him, the man who once held me on his shoulders, the man who let his new wife throw his own father out like trash. "Peace doesn't come from pretending nothing happened," I said. He lowered his eyes. "I just want to fix it." "You can start," I replied, "by not showing up again unless you're willing to look him in the eyes and say you're sorry. For real, not because of court dates or news cameras, but because he deserved better." He didn't say another word. Just nodded, turned, and left. That night, Grandpa and I sat on the porch. He wore his green tie, again just because. I wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and handed him a plate of pie. He chuckled. "You always cut it too big." I smiled. "I owe you a lifetime of slices." Above us, the sky was quiet, but the silence felt different now. This wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of being finally heard. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the yard outside Grandpa's house before December had even begun. The porch steps, now sturdy, freshly painted, held our chairs side by side, just like they used to when I was little. Except this time, I wasn't visiting. I was home. I'd given up my apartment in Seattle, paused my freelance contracts, moved everything into the guest room, which Grandpa quickly renamed Sophia's room, and filled with books, plants, and the quilt Grandma had made the year I was born. We spent the early days quietly, tea in the morning, walks when Grandpa was up for it. Some afternoons, I helped him sort through old letters and photos, digitizing the pieces of his life that no one else had cared enough to preserve. He seemed lighter. One night, after a dinner of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, he looked at me and said softly, "You know, I always thought I'd leave this house feeling like a burden. But now, I feel like I left a legacy. I reached across the table, took his hand. You didn't just leave one, Grandpa. You lived it. Every single day. In the weeks that followed, the case against my father and Cynthia moved forward. I didn't follow every detail, Elliot handled most of it, but I knew enough. The money was gone, but the truth remained. And sometimes, that's more powerful than compensation. One snowy evening, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. I failed you both. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm sorry. Not because I was caught, but because I finally understand what I lost. Dad. I folded the letter quietly, showed it to Grandpa. He read it, nodded, and said, "Too late for some things. Not too late for all." We didn't reply. Some healing doesn't need words. Only boundaries. And presence. As the fireplace crackled that night, and Grandpa nodded off in his recliner, I sat beside him sketching out a new project-in illustrated book called The Man on the Porch. It wouldn't be about pain. It would be about hope. About the people who wait. And the ones who show up. And in that quiet, fire-lit room, I knew. We weren't broken. We were rebuilt.